We have a lot of bad things coming up. You could end up in a depression of the 1929 variety, which would be a devastating thing. Took many years, took decades to recover from it. And we're very close to that.
Breaking news as Meta announces additional mass layoffs as they fire 5% of their workforce, absolutely blindsiding and shocking many of their ex-employees as they claim foul play and their performance review unfairly being downgraded. Now, in addition to that, Mass General has announced their own series of mass layoffs as the #1 private employer of Massachusetts continues to struggle through the overwhelming challenges in the healthcare industry. Now, we're going to end this video talking about the overwhelmingly confusing recessionary data, some of which says that a recession is a long way away, if at all. Other recessionary data saying that there is a recession right around the corner. So what the heck is going on with this whole recession? Mitch Vexler, sir, happy Tuesday. How are you? And I will also say that watching Jerome Powell testify was an absolute waste of time today. And also, sir, what did you think about that opening clip of Trump warning about another Great Depression?
Well, there's a lot there. President Trump is onto something, obviously, because this is a very big problem with regard to the data and the math. And then watching Jerome Powell, you got to have 2 shots of espresso before you do that. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, he can talk and talk and literally say nothing.
He says nothing, Mitch. It's just in circles. Oh, I mean, I couldn't watch it. I tried to watch it. I just couldn't do it anymore. It's the same thing over and over. But either way, sir, let's get started with what's going on with Meta, and let's see if there's any foul play. This article from the Tribune came out today, February 11th, titled, Meta lays off 4,000 employees as Mark Zuckerberg pushes AI investment. And that may not be the truth. Let's read a little bit of this. Meta has begun cutting thousands of jobs as part of CEO's Mark Zuckerberg's continued push for efficiency and AI investment, or rather replacement. Let's just say replacing their employees. Affected employees in the US, Europe, and Asia have started receiving notifications according to an internal memo obtained by Business Insider. The company is eliminating about 5% of its workforce, equating to nearly 4,000 employees. Now, Zuckerberg did warn its staff in January that Meta would raise the bar on performance evaluations, leading to a crackdown on low-rated employees. I'd hate to be one of these employees because you now have that reputation of being one of the employees that sucks. Now, this aligns with a broader trend in big tech where companies like Microsoft and Amazon are also downsizing after pandemic-era hiring sprees. You know, Mitch, I just wanted to point out, it's very interesting how this article is actually defending Meta. I wonder if Meta paid them any money. Just a question. Despite being profitable, Meta, see, right? Despite being profitable, who cares about the inflation adjustments? Despite being profitable, Meta is aggressive reallocating resources to AI, requiring billions in infrastructure investments. Since Zuckerberg's year of efficiency announcement in 2023, Meta's stock has soared, adding over $1 trillion in market value. We've come a long way to people being crucified for laying off people. Now they get rewarded with stocks, with their stock going up. It's absolutely disgusting. Now, impacted employees in the US will receive a severance package, including 16 weeks of pay, plus 2 additional weeks per year of service. However, employees have voiced concerns about a culture of fear and uncertainty, with some comparing Meta's environment to a George Orwell novel. Then just leave and take the severance, man. I mean, geez Louise. What's interesting, Mitch, is this article actually came out the 10th yesterday. Now, this article is titled, Meta's Job Cuts Surprised Some Employees Who Said They Weren't Low Performers. Just a couple things here that I want to point out. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but Meta downgraded some employee ratings. And if you guys go through this, there are multiple employees that told Business Insider that they should not have been rated so low and that it was a mistake. It was done unfairly, a sudden downgrade. I mean, blah, 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 goes on and on and on. Bunch of ungrateful little brats. I'm just kidding, Mitch. I'm totally kidding. You guys, I have 4 children. Forgive me for saying that. I meant no offense. I don't want to get roasted in the comment section. But, you know, Mitch, my first question is, you know, if I'm one of these people that was recently laid off by Meta for having a low performance, do you think that reputation is going to stick with me? Like if I go to work for another tech company and say, hey, who'd you used to work for? Oh, I used to work for Meta. Why did you get laid off? Low performance. Do you think that could be a potential problem?
No, not really. I mean, if you know what you're doing and if you have a good resume, no, the fact that you work for Meta and something like this happens, this isn't a black mark. This is just simply a ramification of the fraud that Meta was committing on society. And so they hired a lot of people to create that fraud, the illusion of, well, they're right, and they took a political side and it blew up in their face. In fact, as you know, Zuckerberg has been in Florida having conversations with Trump, and now all of a sudden he's kind of switching allegiances. Well, the allegiance is in his own mind, right? You can't trust anything that's coming out of his mouth for obvious reasons. So this is a ramification not to be reflected upon any employees, but ramification to be reflected upon the board and Zuckerberg himself.
I'm going to say this, the jury's still out on those employees. I have not been liking what I've been saying from some of these so-called employees, especially at restaurants. My gosh, what happened to the customer service? But, this brings me to my last question on this segment. It kind of goes right into it. Do you think that Mark Zuckerberg is just lying about performance reviews and lying about why they're doing mass layoffs because their company, in fact, is in trouble?
Is he lying or painting a picture? Could be one and the same. But the fact of the matter is he cares about the share price. And if there is no need, as we've said on a couple of these videos, if there's no need to have these employees because the fraud that was being painted or created and painted is no longer a necessity. So a lot of these employees, computer programmers, drafters, what have you, just simply aren't necessary to keep painting the illusion. So they're jettisoning, and that's been part of the problem. Right? We've seen this in multiple operations, not just Meta.
And I hope the public, Mitch, realizes that they can't trust these people. And I hope they realize once you lie to us one time, that's it. Stop believing people that are lying to you. And it's really clear when they have financial bias. Now, let's move on out of the tech industry, which is suffering, and we'll see how bad these layoffs get in 2025. Let's now go on to another industry that's also suffering, which is the health industry. And let's take a look at what's going on over in Massachusetts. This article came out February 10th, titled Mass General Brigham Announces Largest Layoff in Its History Amid Ongoing Restructuring. Said Monday it will let go of hundreds of employees in the next 2 months, the largest layoff in the organization's history as the health system grapples with anticipated financial shortfalls and ongoing operational challenges at its 12 hospitals. That's a real big sign of what's really going on in the healthcare system. With roughly 82,000 employees, a lot of people work there, MGB is easily the state's largest private employer. Executives declined to say how many people would be let go, but said the target is to save at least $200 million annually, or approximately 2% of its salary and benefits costs. We are facing the same unrelenting pressures affecting many healthcare systems across the country that are contributing to a projected budget gap of $250 million within the next 2 years. Reductions will be focused on administration and management levels of the sprawling organization. If we do not take definitive action now to stabilize our financial health, we compromise our ability to continue to invest in our mission. Experts looking at the system's financials said its recent performance points to a level of resilience to face future challenges, at least compared to other Massachusetts hospitals, and that means that other Massachusetts hospitals are in the same type of distress, if not worse, that have less cash and smaller investment portfolio. One bright spot for the hospital system is the billions of dollars it has seen in investment gains over the past years, but earnings on that money are largely either restricted by donors to certain users or earmarked to capital projects such as a $2 billion expansion at Massachusetts General Hospital. The article goes on and on. For the viewers, that article is going to be linked in my description. Feel free to go there, click it, and dig into the whole thing. But the fact of the matter is that's Massachusetts' #1 private employer. They own 12 hospitals. According to analysts, they're in better shape than most other hospitals there. They're suffering. Mitch, do you see more mass layoffs coming to the healthcare industry or healthcare sector in 2025?
Yes, but for a variety of reasons. The biggest reason of which is Medicare, Medicaid, and the fraud by billing back to the federal government through which is receipt of your tax dollars, your income tax dollars. So it's the payment that comes from the federal government that helps keep a lot of these hospitals alive. Then inside of that is multiple layers of fraud. So when you walk into a hospital and emergency room and you get a bill for $1,400 for ibuprofen, that's a problem. So who's gigging the system and how much fraud is built into that system necessary to keep those hospitals operating? So the way that I would equate it, because I did look at the Boeing income statement and balance sheets that were available online. And obviously Boeing is a huge, massive operation with tens of thousands of inputs that goes into the production of a plane. Well, the same thing can be said for a hospital. It's got thousands of inputs, right? You've got your employees, you've got the cost of medicine, and then you've got the insurance, and the insurance department's necessary to build back both the state funding and the federal funding. So there's all sorts of layers of problems. Well, when those layers of problems aren't accountable and could be dealt with a label of fraud because they're not totally accountable, they are not transparent, that creates problems. Well, they take it out on the employees. So when things are good, i.e. the fraud is accessible, then they hire more employees. When the fraud and the federal government and the states start saying we don't have money, then the level of employees goes down. That's the net result of what you're seeing.
So in other words, yes, and because of the fraud associated with Medicare and Medicaid, that's a really good call. Now, when we take out fraud out of the equation and we just look at, I mean, I'm going to say inflation, but that's kind of goes hand in hand with fraud. But, you know, when we look at inflation, when we look at the quality of care that the healthcare system is giving back to the patients, when we look at the skyrocketing costs for not only the hospitals, for the patients, for mom and pop, I mean, they can't afford to even have health insurance. I canceled my health insurance so I could afford to send my children to private school. What do you think of those things, minus the fraud, is the biggest issue right now facing healthcare?
It's not just healthcare, it's seniors housing, it's memory care, it's the ability to get qualified staff into these facilities. And that is a ramification of the dollars. In truth, that is a ramification of the fraud built into the system on both levels, right? So if you're mom and pop, just like you, and you canceled an insurance policy because there's only so much money to go around, you're making the point that you can't get blood out of a stone, which comes right back to the memo that we're working on, right? The only thing that matters is the median household income. There's only so much money that is available to be spent. Well, to a certain extent, you can say that at the hospitals as well, or you can say it at the nursing homes as well. There's only so much money to be spent because mom and pop might have a senior, their mom or dad in one of those facilities, and getting qualified staff in those facilities to pay a qualified rate of employment is extremely difficult. There's just simply not enough qualified people to go around. Same thing can be said in the hospitals. This is a problem, which brings on the hospital side a question. Are you better off having fewer hospitals, better staffed, with more money to go into those hospitals? And what happens when you have mass immigration, the hospital rooms themselves, the emergency rooms, get overwhelmed. And then that ends up being understaffed. There's not enough people on the staff to look after the people in the emergency room. And all of that backs up throughout the entire hospital, because what if an emergency surgery is necessary that you didn't know about, you didn't have the staff to do, and now you got to call people in? Well, I know for a fact hospitals are calling in doctors from other facilities. So there's problems throughout this entire chain. And that's why I equated it back to Boeing, because you've got tens of thousands of inputs that have got to be dealt with. And based on what we're seeing on an accounting side, you have the same problem with accountants that can't add. So how do you tabulate the fraud? How do you fix this system when every layer of this has got a problem?
Before we go into the recession indicators, let me ask you this question. Do you think we need a total redo of the healthcare system personally? Again, as someone that pays less money without insurance, and I have procedures every year, and I save by not having insurance about $12,000 a year. It's broken, brother. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It's a joke. It's a fraud. It's a scam. It seems like. I think we need a total redo. I think that pre-existing is important, but there's, again, like you said, there's so much fraud, especially Medicare. My God, what they're getting away with on the reimbursements, especially for those little jazzy wheelchairs. But do you think that the healthcare system can be saved as is?
No. It's so badly broken. There's so many older hospitals that really should not be in service. They're in service because obviously there's a need, but the question is, what is the cost to satisfy that need versus a newer facility, bigger, more modern, with better employees that are well paid? So the current system, based on what we've seen, I obviously go to hospitals. We've seen hospitals come our way that are for sale, that are derelict. That happens all the time. The point of the matter is, and the straight answer to your question is no. Why? Because mom and pop only have so much money to spend. And when a hospital comes online and they're highly levered and they have a pro forma and they say, well, we can meet this requirement of the leverage based on this pro forma. And that turns out not to be true because mom and pop, regardless of their economic strata, it doesn't matter, right? Mom and pop don't have that money. And you're living proof of that. So we know the 30% of the household population is going to go bankrupt or lose the roof over their head based on the math. We know this. And the only difference between them going bankrupt today and not is $9,000, of which $7,000 is the real estate tax. This is one more reason to eliminate the real estate tax and put that money back into the pocket of mom and pop. A, B, it also restores their balance sheet, but so they can own the asset under their feet. But that frees up more money, which goes back into the economy to spend on such things as healthcare. Or look after your own, go to a local doc in the box rather than going to the emergency room. There's all these levers that can be pulled. But the bottom line is that the fraud has to be taken out of the system at all these levels. And then you can get a true transparent picture from which to fix it. Job one is recognize that the fraud is there to begin with.
Yeah. Well, speaking of transparency, let's look at some data and the lack thereof. This article came out from Advisor Perspectives titled Recession Alert Weekly Leading Economic Index. So again, this came out on the 10th. Now, what this is doing is this is going over 20 different sets of data, including corporate bond market, treasury bond market, stock market, labor market, credit market, mortgage market. So a whole bunch of things, and it's trying to indicate whether or not we're going into recession. Let me read this little thing here, then we'll go over this chart. Recession Alert, WLEI. So this is called the WLEI. The chart below uses data going back to 1973 and includes recession starts. It's easy to see that a recession, which is the gray bars, is closely aligned with the recession alert, the WLEI, dropping, and here it is, into negative territory. So when it's in negative territory, a recession should be right around the corner. Note, however, there have been a few instances where the index has contracted without a recession being called. First during the back half of 1984, and again recently in May of 2002 through June of 2023. With that said, it is a fair assessment to say that the WLEI has been a reliable indicator for recession calls. Here's this chart right here, and you see the purple line is the index. And what I wanted to point out is we're far away from negative. Okay, and also what I want to point out is when it goes into negative territory, you can see here, generally we go into recession. I can only see one time where it was going up that we entered recession right here in about 1982. You can see that. Also, I want to point out is according to this data, Mitch, we are a ways away from recession. And I also want to make a point. You see this rebound right here? So it went negative and it rebounded. I think it's fair to say the reason for that rebound is the bank term funding program. In other words, the Federal Reserve over the weekend printed us out of recession when we needed it as a country. Nevertheless, this is saying we're a little bit ways away from recession. This is a total weeks in the negative. So right now we're about 56, average being about 78. So we're far, again, according to that data, from the actual recession. Here's another set of data. This came out yesterday as well, called Unemployment Claims and the CLF as a Recession Indicator for January of 2025. Now, in other words, guys, essentially, a lot of people have been looking at the SIAM rule, which is essentially the trajectory of unemployment. Okay, so when we look at the trajectory, and this is the Unemployment Insurance Weekly Claims Report, but you can see that generally when we go into recession, the trajectory of unemployment is going up right into recession. Recently, unemployment has been a little bit whiplashing and went into a downward trajectory. It's not showing the upward trajectory. You guys can see that right there. When we go to this next chart, ratio of initial unemployment claims to the civil labor workforce, we are very low. This is saying that 0.125 or about 12 and a half workers out of 10,000 have filed for payments. The other recessions we went into, Mitch, we were over about a quarter, so 25 out of 10,000 instead of 13. But my point in showing you this is, historically, this is also low. So the first couple indicators don't show us going into recession at all. And again, I'm not looking at median household income, which you and I will continuously argue is one of the most important things. Now, this set of data says the opposite of what we just reviewed. Global recession fears may strike markets after weak US PMI data. And this came out a few days ago. When you look at this chart here, here's the US composite PMI. You can see the trajectory literally plummeting right now for our PMI data. The global economy slowed in January, according to Purchasing Managers Index data from JP Morgan and S&P Global. The pace of manufacturing and service sector activity growth cooled to the slowest in 12 months. The culprit was a slowdown in the services side, the source of strength offsetting anemic industry last year. Perhaps more troubling, a long-feared come down in the U.S. service sector appears to have caused the most damage. While growth continued, the rate of expansion clocked in at the weakest since April. The composite PMI gauge that includes manufacturing likewise dropped to a 9-month low. This warns that the day of reckoning for global economic growth imbalances may finally have arrived. The U.S. has overwhelmingly shouldered the burden for powering worldwide expansion since the middle of last year, while Europe and you-know-who lost steam. The gap now looks to be closing at the expense of rising global recession risks. Mitch, one of the questions I want to ask is why this data is so confusing and whether it probably has a lot to do with inflation, fraud, and data manipulation. But before I do that, can we safely conclude, based on the first data set that we looked at, that the recession, that the can was kicked down the road because of the bank term funding program in March of 2023, essentially saving the banks from failure? Do you think that that data, beyond a shadow of doubt, prove that that's exactly what the bank term funding program did?
Well, in reality, that is a major component of it, right? Every time you print money for, in this case, a nefarious purpose, which would be through the Federal Reserve to support the banks, that is the net result. But when you print money, that creates inflation. Inflation is a hidden tax. It's an illegal tax. And that fraud has a cost. So if you think about it, we're right back to that word leverage. What just happened? Well, they printed money, which creates leverage that mom and pop have to pay for, just depending on whether you're at the state level or the federal level, for the next 20 to 40 years, right? It's just, it's your amortization. It's mom and pop's amortization on their house in reverse. Well, we don't pay it off. We just keep adding to the debt. That's the mantra of the government. Well, that's a fraud, right? When there's no mathematical basis from which to do this, to support an entity that has nothing to do with mom and pop, the net result of this is straight fraud. This is what your central appraisal districts are doing. When they take the value of your house and they jack it up 100% over 5 years, there's no mathematical basis. There is no law. It doesn't exist in USPAP. It doesn't exist in your state's property tax code. It doesn't exist under the 16th Amendment to the US Constitution. It is a straight up fraud. It's happening on multiple levels. It happens at the federal level and it happens at the state level. Either way, all of these reports that you read, without exception, are completely meaningless. On my website is what we call CPI, the big lie. It lays out every single reason why it's all meaningless. But over and above that, the only thing that matters, and I'll keep hammering on this nonstop, is the median household income. Why? Because it's the median household income. It's what money is left in your pocket from which you to go to the store and spend money, right? That's your cash flow after your debt service. That's all that matters. Well, if you don't have any, which 30% of the households do not, then you cannot possibly say that any single one of these indicators means a damn thing. Because if the money is not in the system to spend, to keep the system going, the system will crash. This is straight up math. We have the facts on our side, we have the law on our side, we have the math on our side. The fraudsters, they have fraud.
Yeah, but one thing we don't have on our side is the data. You know, Mitch, why do you think that the data is so conflicting and so confusing? Does it have to do specifically with inflation? Is that why it's so conflicting?
Yes, they're painting a picture that isn't true. It cannot be true. Look at the math and everything that we've done, right? I don't care if you just take it down to one household. Let's do that. So if that household has $85,000 in gross income, and by the time they're done with all their expenses, never mind the fact that they can't afford health insurance or whatever else that they're not paying for, in reality, they need $119,000 in order to survive, to stay break even. Well, that delta is complete negative. So if you've got 30%, which you do, 30% plus, like our math is actually showing it's pretty close to 37%. Let's just run with 30% plus. How can anybody possibly say that the economic output, which is what truly needs to be measured here, is positive? You can't. And I'll go one further. Let's just say for the sake of conversation that 30% plus defaults. They cannot pay under any circumstance. It's not there. They don't have the leverage, whatever it is. They cannot pay. If somebody says, well, we'll get it from the next 30%, okay? Let's put some numbers to this. 30% of the households is 42 million households. If you say we're going to get it from the next 30%, that's another 42 million households. What makes you think that that other 42 million households can pick up the negative $20,000 per household from the first group? The point of the matter is they can't. So the conflicting information that you're getting is conflicting on purpose because they changed the CPI. And if you change the CPI, all these other lies under the hood start magnifying. But it all comes back down to one thing. It's the median household income.
Well said, sir. And it's going to continue that way until maybe all of the data is revised like they did during the global financial crisis. I can't wait for that to happen. Mitch, let's get the viewers out of here. I want to give you the last words. Sir, how are we going to end this video out?
Unfortunately, it will end one of two ways. Either the fraud in the system will be eliminated or the system will implode. There is no other way to do this. When we're pounding the table, we're exposing it. A lot of other people are exposing it as well. But the math is the math. And somebody who chooses to ignore the Great Depression is a fool. Things line up for that reason. And all these years later, from the Federal Reserve, all of this amount of money that has been printed for the sole purpose of continuing to prop up these banks is a major impact on mom and pop and why you don't have the money. That's on the federal side. Your school districts, as part of the taxing entity, have done the exact same thing and take the exact same attitude as the Federal Reserve. We answer to no one. In fact, Chuck Saling, in the deposition we took of him, literally said, we are Denton Central Appraisal District, and the public is just going to have to trust us.
Well, I don't
we
know
answer
that.
to no one.
Yeah, I trust no one. Honestly, they can't even do math. Anyways, I won't go there. Mitch, well said. And you guys, to the viewers, don't forget, like this video, share the video, comment below, let us know what you guys learned. And don't forget to go to the description of this video, check out the links. And other than that, if you guys are out there just living your life, investing in real estate, the stock market, whatever it is you're doing, you guys already know. We wish you luck and we hope you win.